Welcome to the Climate and Coordination RCAST, where every week we'll be discussing topics related to all things climate change and RChain's role in the solution. We will be discussing technologies that can adapt and coordinate massive amounts of data like never before, forming social architectures that grow collective intelligence, sharing and evaluating data planetarily, all while maintaining personal privacy and personal data ownership. A new decentralized economy is forming as we move from the third industrial revolution, digitization, to the fourth, decarbonization. By building a co-op, built on a correct by construction, concurrent, scalable solution, RChain is structured to build out the new technology that will be required for a flourishing regenerative planet. Please join us on this journey.
Okay, hello and welcome to the newest iteration of the Climate and Coordination RCAST. Today we have a variety of topics to discuss, and the first one comes from United Nations News. I always find great articles on the United Nations blog. If anybody's ever interested in doing research there, you can just click a topic and they have a voluminous list of up-to-date and well-cited articles. So I really enjoy reading on the United Nations blog. But this is a newer piece from January 27th. Just last month, it says climate change is a global emergency, people say in biggest ever climate poll. So they surveyed the United Nations. Actually, it's the United Nations Development Program, the UNDP. They surveyed over 1 million people. It's 1.2 million people participated in this poll. And it was a poll that happened across the entire world. And it says here that almost 2/3 of those people said in the poll that climate change is a global emergency. And this was called the People's Climate Vote. And it was conducted in 50 countries with 17 languages. So I think they really tried to get a very wide sample of different people of different ages, different economic backgrounds, and so forth. Also, they surveyed heavily young people, while they took very wide, there are people from all ages represented. It says here that there are over 500,000 people under the age of 18, because I think they really wanted to understand where young people were thinking about this. And they even, it says here, innovations such as distribution across mobile gaming networks were used to ensure that the young audience were reached. So it's really fascinating the way they conducted this. And basically, I think one reason why they wanted to do this poll, I'm honestly surprised it's only 2/3 of people say that climate change is a global emergency. But I think also it really helps governments around the world and the UN to really be able to point to a poll like this when they say that the people of the world are with them and that the people around the world really recognize the scale of the emergency. When they have a poll like this, I think it really helps to unite governments and the private sector as well to understand, like, yes, there is widespread support for solving this problem across the world. Here, just say one more thing about this. It says there was very high recognition of the climate emergency among those who had attended university or college in all countries, from lower income countries such as Bhutan and Democratic Republic of Congo, both at 82%, to wealthy countries like France, 87%, and Japan, 82%. Findings were also revealed that while younger people under 18 were more likely to say climate change is an emergency, other age groups were not far behind. 65% of ages 18 to 35. That's lower than I would have expected, but 66% aged 36 to 59, which is very interesting, and 58% of people over 60 expressing the same affirmation. So the last thing it says is this illustrated how widely held this view has become. And I just think it's fascinating that 1% more people believe climate is a global emergency if they're aged 36 to 59 versus 18 to 35. So I wonder if that's just kind of a blip in the statistics, if there's an unexplained phenomenon happening there, or if there's actually a potential reason for that. So anyway, I think this poll is great. I hope that they do more polling across the world, because I think it's great to get a global consensus on what's going on. And yeah, I'd love to hear anybody's comments about this.
Yeah, well, it's just, I guess what's kind of blowing my mind lately is that there's been less pushback than I was expecting from Biden's announcements and efforts, and the U.S. rejoining the climate accord. And I think a big part of that is probably because of things like that letter that I brought up last week, where 100 world business leaders say, Biden, we've got your back, and so it's kind of a checkmate. So this is just, again, another example of like really positive news in that it seems like people actually are taking this seriously and actually acting. So
yeah, I completely agree. It's just great to know that no matter where you go in the world, hopefully 2/3 of the people around you understand that we're in an emergency with climate. Hopefully the rest of those people, the rest of the 33-ish% would say, I don't think it's an emergency, but I think it's a serious issue, or at least it's definitely happening, or whatever. I wish that they had explained what the other options were in the poll, or maybe it was just a yes or no. But I hope that there are more polls, because I think that they really unite people across geography, across, religion, across whatever. And I think that is such an important aspect of coordinating everybody, is to understand that we're united, no matter if we're living in a rich or poor country or what. So yeah, I thought that was a great piece of journalism there. And I'm going to be looking out for more from the UN, because they're doing a lot on this climate topic, especially.
I would really like to know a little bit more about how they reached out through the gaming platforms. I mean, that sounds very interesting to me.
Yeah, I agree. They didn't really cite anything there, but I could study that more and see if I could find some relevant information about that. I'm gonna guess that it was probably just an ad within the apps that said take a poll from on climate, and probably just maybe out of curiosity people clicked on it. I'm not sure exactly if there was a reward attached to that at all, but it was a wise thing to do, that's for sure.
Yeah, I mean, I'm interested in lots of different ways. One is I really would like to be able to reach out to the gaming communities, because there are a lot of young programmers there. But also I'm thinking about it from the other angle, which is, is the UN a potential sponsor for Dazzle? do they want to reach out to people who are using dApps and get that kind of demographic?
Yeah, I mean, these highly relevant questions.
Yeah. So anyway, it's a very interesting article, and it is very positive. I mean, it gives me warm feelings to know that that the tide is turning.
Yeah, well, I'll see if I can find some answers to those questions. I'll do some research on that.
Cool.
Yeah, it's so interesting. Just one final point on that before I share the other article. It's really interesting to me that like the sort of culture around gaming is like changed so much in the past, like I would say even just 5 years, maybe 10 years at the most. It used to be like the idea that people who played video games were kind of lazy and unambitious and, whatever. And now you've got people like Chamath Palihapitiya and other people saying that, knowing how to code is more valuable than having a master's degree. And obviously, not everybody who plays games can code, but there is a huge connect, I think, there in that community. Like, that community is so, first off, it's a huge community. It's a huge economic gold mine, really. I mean, like, games are one of the most lucrative entertainment platforms to work in. And obviously we're seeing a big connection between the gaming and also people who have these like really advanced skills that are sought out for by every Fortune 500 company. So it's just interesting to me that those things can evolve and change so quickly.
I agree. I mean, along these lines, I know we want to get to the other article, but along these lines, there's a couple of interesting connections and data points. One is that that book, The Neurogeneration, that I've been citing on this forum many times. One of the therapy mechanisms, the neuro-based therapy mechanisms that she investigates is through games and simulation. And apparently a number of companies have been employing gaming to address certain kinds of neurological pathologies. And in particular, it is very effective in delaying the onset of mental degeneration in the elderly. So they have really good numbers, solid, respected numbers on these kinds of results. So I think that they're beginning to look at gaming as a means to address, as a therapeutic mechanism, basically. The other interesting thing is that I recently became aware of an online forum called the STOA, which I think we should investigate. But one of the people that was interviewed at the STOA was a researcher who had done work on collective intelligence. And one of the ways they used to collect data on collective intelligence was a game. So the game was able to ascertain certain kinds of collective intelligence metrics. I don't remember the details off the top of my head. I have to go back and refresh. But I think that's also an interesting area. And I wonder if, gaming in general might, both find groups that are collectively intelligent, but also promote collective intelligence. So that's another, and so it might be that in terms of the article you were quoting, it may be that the gamer community is more collectively intelligent, and as a result, that's why we see certain kinds of skews with respect to their collective wisdom.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So what was that forum you're talking about? The STOA?
STOA, yeah, it's intriguing. They have a YouTube channel, STOA. I found them through a YouTuber that I have become just completely enamored with, ContraPoints.
Oh, yeah, you were talking about her.
Yeah, she's just phenomenal. Wow, what a mind. But she was interviewed on the STOA as well, so that was very interesting.
STOA?
Yeah, STOA. I think it's after the Stoics. So.
Okay. I'm gonna check that
Interesting.
out.
Okay, well, this is the next subject I had for today. This is, I guess I'm just laughing because it's just so shocking and not shocking at the same time. This is from Forbes, February 2nd. Headline: ExxonMobil caps year from hell with $22 billion in losses as activists demand big change. Like, if you were a climate activist 5 years ago and you were dreaming up headlines, this is what you would dream. This is a crazy situation. So I was just watching MSNBC the other night, and they were talking about this story. well, not this particular story, but the situation with Exxon. And a $22 billion a year loss equates to about a $61 million loss per day, which is incredible. I don't even understand how, well, I guess I do understand how you can lose that much money. But anyway, I just wanted to, did I put the link in the chat? Let's see. Yes, I did. Okay, I just wanted to discuss a couple of points that this piece talks about because Exxon really is, this industry is collapsing. That's really all I can say. I don't know how else to explain it, but these losses are astronomical. They are not, they're not decreasing anytime soon. They've had long-term struggles for years now, but recently they've really reached a new low, which I don't really see much chance for them getting out of. Apparently now they have been issued an additional $3.2 billion of debt, which is, quite a lot, no matter what size you are of a company. It says here, it's easy to spend money you don't have when you're sitting on a balance sheet as big as Exxon's, but it has to be embarrassing to CEO Darren Woods that the company is now burdened with $62 billion in debt versus just $12 billion a decade ago. And then they took on that additional $3.2 billion just recently. So they're taking on debt extremely quickly. I don't know. They still think that they can, quote, emerge a stronger company, but I don't really see how they're going to get out of this situation with everything that we've been talking about over the past few weeks and months. The demand for oil is just, collapsing. Now, that's not to say that there are not people who are trying to drill for more. That's not to say that emissions are going to be, it would be great if our climate related emissions would decrease as fast as the share price or the price per barrel of companies like this. But sadly, this has to happen first, and then we can talk about the rest. I just wanted to say one more thing. Apparently, let's see here. Yes, it says Exxon announced today that the creation of a low carbon solutions business focused on carbon capture and sequestration and the intention of reducing upstream greenhouse gas emissions by 30% by 2025, which is in just 4 years. This is going to be tricky to do if they keep wanting to, drill for more projects. And, it's like you can't burn the candle at both ends. I understand that many of these conglomerates are trying to position themselves to be the heroes of this nightmare. I appreciate the intention to create good technology. I hope that they do that. I hope that it works. But we are still drilling for oil all over the world and other types of fossil fuels. So it seems like, I don't know, I think it would be great to work on carbon capture technology, but we also should stop drilling for more oil. Otherwise, I feel like we're kind of going to be spinning our wheels a little bit. I guess maybe some people believe that carbon capture is more urgent and we should start it now. And regardless of if people are continuing to drill, to me, it seems like we should turn off the faucet and then take out the mop. But that's just my opinion. I am curious what other people think about this. But anyway, this is a landmark piece. I think that's why it was discussed on MSNBC this week, and I would love to know if anybody has comments about this.
Well, one of the things that I've often thought about is, you have these large scale organizations that maybe their initial purposes are not something that you agree with, but that doesn't mean that, pardon me, all the people and the infrastructure aren't of considerable value. Pardon me. Wow. Anyway, so I wonder what Elon Musk could do with Exxon if just the company was handed over to him, and they said, redirect it in any way you think is the right way to go. To me, that seems like that would be, there's I'm sure there are thousands and thousands of smart and talented people in Exxon, and they have a global presence and a global infrastructure. And the question is, could it be turned towards something that is of more value, right? Could they emerge as a leader in another form of energy, solar or wind, or could they emerge as a communications company? What would happen if SpaceX had all of the resources of Exxon under their aegis?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I would be interested to tweet at him and just ask him, have you considered purchasing Exxon lately? Just out of the blue, just see if anybody sees it. Which I'm sure he gets probably 100,000 tweets a day. But yeah, no, I completely agree. And there is a lot of really positive infrastructure, I think, that can be used for a good purpose. And actually, I was going to mention this in a different call, but decided not to. I was reading an article about how these companies, oil companies, are having a really hard time procuring new young talent because people don't want to work for oil companies anymore. And they offer them tons of money and all sorts of stuff, and they still are not able to get as many of the really talented young engineers and so forth as they would like. But obviously, if one of those companies had not just a more well-liked or trusted CEO, but really was able to change its entire function, I think that would make a huge difference. And I think that could be a huge job creator, because there are jobs in these places. I just think that a lot of people don't want them. If they're getting offered that kind of money at a place like that, they can get offered similar money at a place that they're proud to work. So, yeah, be an interesting situation to watch and see if anybody does try to purchase these companies or tries to, as you said, redirect their infrastructure, because it seems like it's an opportunity very ripe for the picking. If they're $60 billion in debt, they need some help. But obviously that is a huge, purchasing a company like that, I don't even know how much money it would be, but it would be a huge amount of money. I think there are only about 5 or 10 people in the world that have an excess of $80 billion or something astronomically huge like that. So, but of course, people are not purchasing companies with their personal wealth anyway. So anyway, very interesting to see what's going to happen with Exxon and others as they try to hold on for dear life.
Well, I think that the oil industry was hit with like two whammies this year. One was that renewables became cheaper, and then the other one was COVID. So one of those two things are going to probably end, that being COVID, or be at least controlled to some degree. And we're seeing glimmers of what happens when that starts to happen with China, because China's pretty much seems to have kind of dealt with COVID, let's say, at least, better than some other countries. And so their consumption has gone back up again. I was reading an article about that. So I think we're going to probably see another little kind of burp up after COVID with the oil industry, but I also agree that they know the writing's on the wall with the first whammy. They know that renewables are cheaper, so they have to pivot. And I mean, BP has been working on this pivot for at least a decade now, where they've tried to rebrand as Beyond Petroleum. Exxon hasn't. Exxon tried the opposite approach of paying lobbyists and scientists to try to refute climate change, and they've gone down fighting, and so they're paying the price now. But we still are going to need oil. We can't just shut it off. We need oil for shipping. We need oil to fly people around the world. So what also has to happen with the decarbonization industrial revolution is we need to come up with better technologies at making that oil cleaner. So there will be that, I think, venture for these companies to get involved in. So yeah, I think it's going to be an interesting thing to see. Hopefully there will be some really good alternatives with renewables combined with storage, battery storage, that will help solve some of this stuff as COVID starts to go away and the demand starts to go back up. But yeah, it's an interesting time we live in. A time of transition.
And
Yeah,
I know what you meant when you said COVID starts to go away, but I don't think COVID is going to go away. I think we're going to develop robust immunity in subsequent generations, and we'll develop vaccination in the interim. But I don't think it's going away, and at the rate at which it's mutating, I think it's going to have a fairly long lifespan, and it's going to impact culture a lot longer than we we are hopeful that it might.
Yeah, you're probably right. But I was just kind of commenting on what will happen is the United States, which is what is it again? 1/8 of the population of the planet and 25% of the COVID cases. The United States has dealt with this extremely poorly. And it's kind of shocking for us up here in Canada to observe it, because our cultures aren't that different, but we're dealing with it better. And so I think you will notice that this new administration already is hitting the ground running, and you're going to see great improvements, and less people in the hospital and more people feeling freer to walk around, perhaps, and so I do think there's going to be a bump, like a return back to people kind of rushing out to consume again, like what's happening in China. But I also agree with you that it's not going to go away. I think it's going to probably be something more like how we dealt with AIDS, where we got better treatment for it, and we got we figured out how to kind of make it not on the forefront. Yeah, but then again, there's other viruses that can rise up. Yeah, who knows?
Yeah.
And I think that just to add to one thing with that is that we're still experiencing, and probably, if I'm correct, I think we will continue to experience a huge inequity in vaccine distribution across the world. For example, I read or heard a report, but I'm sure it's easily verifiable, that Canada has purchased 5 times the amount of vaccine that it actually needs for its population. And I'm sure that's same is true in America and other wealthy countries, while there are other nations which are really suffering because of COVID that have no vaccine at all. And because of that, because of the uneven response, the virus is going to be able to continue to mutate, and then it's going to keep coming back in different variants. And then, basically the vaccines hopefully will be still effective. I remember Dr. Fauci was answering a question about this, and he said that even though with some variants of vaccine might be a little bit less effective, it still offers protection. So it's still way better than not getting the vaccine, for example. But I think in a world where the rich nations are hoarding vaccine, it's going to be really hard to get rid of COVID, in a timely manner. I mean, there are countries that can't even expect to receive any vaccine for years, and that's totally unfair.
Well, it's good business for companies like Pfizer and Moderna that have vaccine development platforms where they can quickly iterate for variants, and then just once or twice a year, you'll have basically a flu shot.
Yeah.
If you or your government can afford it.
Yeah, but they could also give that patented technology to other companies who could synthesize it. And, if we weren't relying on just these two conglomerates, then I think that the vaccine distribution would be a lot more ethical. And, this should not be the reason that we do it, but it would protect a lot of rich countries economically. That's aside from the moral issue, which is, I think, the most pressing one. But yeah, I mean, we're a globalized society. There's no way that we can continue like this if there are major COVID outbreaks all over the world. It's just not going to work.
I'm saying that the possibility of stamping out COVID entirely seems pretty unlikely because the cat's out of the bag. And so, like Greg was saying, that this is something that's just going to be part of life forevermore or for the foreseeable future, is you're going to have variants and updated vaccines for those variants.
Yeah.
For those who have the availability to get vaccinated.
Yeah, and the sad but true fact is that Pfizer is not properly incentivized to. Right. So the issue is from a very short term perspective. Oh well, if we can make more money by selling to the highest bidder, then that's better for us as a company. Now that kind of thinking is incredibly short sighted, but that's the way capitalism unfolds in its current form.
Weren't there a bunch of vaccines in the last 100 years, like polio and other ones that were given for free, or the information was made publicly available?
Yes, but that's because for those things it's because the mortality rate and or the other health consequences were so dire, right? If you got polio, you were debilitated. Right?
I mean, I think the health consequences for COVID are pretty dire.
But not at the rates that the issue. You see, that's the problem.
I think the problem is greed, but you're right about that too.
I agree 100%. It's about greed.
Yeah. So
well, there are other antiviral innovations that are in the pipeline. So different approaches for stopping virus from being transmitted. And I was just reading about one recently, which is derived from a plant called Fapsigargin. It's a broad spectrum antiviral, which is in development.
That's very interesting.
So we could innovate our way out of it. We'll see.
Yeah.
And once again, the remedy relies on a living planet, once again, just like everything else that we need. If we cut down all the forests, then we're screwed once again.
Yeah, that's certainly true.
So Darryl, I know that you had some topics you wanted to discuss.
Yeah, I'm wondering whether you guys heard anything about the speech that Tim Cook gave last week.
No, I haven't read it nor seen it.
Yeah, he spoke at this conference, Brussels-based Computers, Privacy, and Data Protection Conference.
Oh, interesting.
On the 28th, January 28th. And he said made some bold statements. One of them was, I quote, "A social dilemma cannot be allowed to become a social catastrophe." And he quite clearly was targeted his ire at Facebook without naming their name. And I guess you may know that there's already this conflict going on between Apple and Facebook, where Apple is kind of thrown a wrench in Facebook's kind of advertising model. No,
do say more. I'm not sure I know the details of that.
Let's see. This actually wasn't the article I was going to bring up, but there was something that Apple did where they made a change to their privacy policy that completely affected Facebook's ability to practice surveillance capitalism. And Mark Zuckerberg came out and made a bunch of, statements saying it's going to hurt small businesses and stuff. You know what they usually do when they try to play good cop. And so there's been this kind of battle going on, and so Tim Cook kind of upped the temperature on his battle with this speech. And so there's a couple articles. One, the headline is "Tim Cook: Privacy and Climate Change are the top issues of the century." So I'll just read a little bit from this. So this was on January 28th. "Today is Data Privacy Day. Don't kick yourself if you haven't heard of it. Not many people have. Yet it's never been more important as technology for capturing, analyzing, and categorizing virtually any imaginable piece of data about us, from our heartbeats to our most private thoughts, becomes only more advanced, invasive, and pervasive. To mark the day, Apple CEO Tim Cook gave a live-streamed keynote speech opening a panel discussion on the importance of user privacy at the Brussels-based Computers, Privacy, and Data Protection Conference this morning. That he keynoted the panel is no surprise. Apple is the only big tech company that's fully embraced privacy, not just as a feature, but also the mantra that it's a fundamental human right. In a comparison that I've never heard anyone make before, Cook says that the erosion of privacy ranks with the disastrous man-made global warming the planet is experiencing. Here's a quote from Tim. "In terms of privacy, I think it is one of the top issues of the century," he tells me. "We have climate change. That is huge. We have privacy. That is huge. And they should be weighed like that. We should put our deep thinking into that and to decide how we can make these things better, and how do we leave something for the next generation that is a lot better than the current situation."
Wow. This is very interesting.
Yeah, I wish I had a link to the actual speech. I'll try to find it. But that connects to an article that was printed in the New York Times the very next day by my hero, Shoshana Zuboff. And she wrote an article headlined, "The Coup We Are Not Talking About." And I'll read a quote. "We may have democracy, or we may have surveillance society, but we cannot have both. A democratic surveillance society is an existential and political impossibility. Make no mistake, this is the fight for the soul of our information civilization." I'm crying. So she doesn't mince words. So she talks about an epistemic coup, a takeover of knowledge, and how it proceeds in 4 stages. The first is the appropriation of epistemic rights, which lays the foundation for all that follows. Surveillance capitalism originates in the discovery that companies can stake a claim to people's lives as free raw material for the extraction of behavioral data, which they then declare their private property. The second stage is marked by a sharp rise in epistemic inequality, defined as the difference between what I can know and what can be known about me. The third stage, which we are living through now, introduces epistemic chaos caused by the profit-driven algorithmic amplification, dissemination, and micro-targeting of corrupt information, much of it produced by coordinated schemes of disinformation. Its effects are felt in the real world, where they splinter shared reality, poison social discourse, paralyze democratic politics, and sometimes instigate violence and death. In the fourth stage, epistemic dominance is institutionalized, overriding democratic governance with computational governance by private surveillance capital. The machines know, and the systems decide, directed and sustained by the illegitimate authority and anti-democratic power of private surveillance capital. Each stage builds on the last. Epistemic chaos prepares the ground for epistemic dominance by weakening democratic society, all too plain in the insurrection at the US Capitol. So this article, it's pretty long and it's a great read. So the article concludes with a section outlining 3 principles that can help guide these early days of the information civilization. She claims that we are now in the 3rd decade of this era. And I quote, "Democracy is under the kind of siege that only democracy can end. If we are to defeat the epistemic coup, then democracy must be the protagonist." So I'd just like to kind of quickly go through these principles because I think it kind of directly connects with what we're wanting to do with RChain and with Dazzle. So principle 1, she claims, is the democratic rule of law. The digital must live in democracy's house, not as an arsonist, but as a member of the family, subject to and thriving on its laws and values. The sleeping giant of democracy finally stirs with important legislative and legal initiatives underway in America and Europe. And then she then goes through some current antitrust legislation and states that though it's important, it doesn't fully address the problem. And I quote, "There may be sound antitrust reasons to break up the big tech empires, but carving up Facebook or any of the others into the surveillance capitalist equivalents of Exxon, Chevron, and Mobil will not shield us from the clear and present dangers of surveillance capitalism. Our time demands more." So she kind of says that principle number 1, actually changing the laws, actually, in antitrust ways, it helps, but it's not the solution. Then she goes to principle number 2, which is new conditions summon new rights. And I quote, "A democratic information civilization cannot progress without new charters of epistemic rights that protect citizens from the massive scale invasion and theft compelled by surveillance economics." And so I kind of interpret what she's saying there in a way more like how Buckminster Fuller approaches things. She's approaching it more from the legislative angle of how governments can implement laws. And I appreciate that. But I think that if you follow the Buckminster Fuller angle of to change something, build a new model that makes the existing model obsolete, I think that's where we might see a solution. So I think that I see that during this time of attention and scrutiny that we're now seeing with people like Tim Cook and others and legislators starting to kind of drag Mark Zuckerberg into the courtroom, we will see new projects that are designed around these principles. So Shoshana and Tim Cook and Tristan Harris and a growing legion of others are laying this all out. And I see principles occurring as more of manifestos for companies and co-ops and type B corporations and other public good-based corporations who will inevitably rise up as alternatives to Facebook during this time of new scrutiny being applied to surveillance capitalism. There's a new demand in the market, is basically what I'm getting at. There's a new demand in the market for an alternative to Facebook that respects privacy and respects people's user data. So we need to make surveillance capitalism obsolete, and our democracy and the future of the information civilization depends on it. So there's this other article, and I think
That was amazing.
well, I mean, but, we should give some time to reflect on this, right? Because I think Zuboff is a deep thinker, and what's been put on the table is fairly weighty. One of the interesting things is Noah Yuval Harari also talks about this in Sapiens and Homo Deus. I think more in Homo Deus. But the issue is that there are going to be benefits from the algorithms that are hard to ignore. Benefits in terms of cost of human life and human suffering. So we're already at the cusp of a time when artificial intelligence will be much better at various forms of diagnosis than human physicians. And they will be much, much better if they have access to a wide range of human behavioral data. And so what you're going to find is a lot of pushback from people who are very concerned about their loved ones, and who will have stories like, you know, my family member would have died had it not been for such and such an algorithm. And so it's going to be a very tricky kind, and that's just one of innumerable situations where the AI is going to outperform the human unless the humans seriously up their game.
Well, Harari recently spoke about this in a 2-hour interview with Tristan Harris. This was just like a week or so ago. And I highly recommend that interview. It's available on Tristan's website. And Yuval Harari goes into, it started to sound a lot like RChain, behavioral types, and how friendly algorithms or an AI sidekick might be able to help us optimize for what we want in our own lives. But then he got really hung up when he started to reflect on how that might affect people's own agency. And then he said he would go off for a month and a half on a meditation retreat and reflect on that.
That's exactly the kind of thing that I think we have to be aware of. Is and Elon Musk is also, he bears no illusions. Like if you go listen to, I think it's his second interview with Joe Rogan, you know, he talks pretty plainly and bluntly that the coming of AI that is that outpaces the human capacity on a number of scales is we're there. In the same way that we're already there with climate change, we're there. And so how we respond to it is going to make all the difference. So I just want to say that, you know, it's wonderful that Zuboff talks about this and raises awareness, but the conversation is going to be much more subtle and much more nuanced. And I'm not sure that the kind of wins that she imagines are going to take place. I think you only have to look at the extent to which humans were willing to sacrifice their civil liberties in the wake of 9/11 to see how quickly civil liberties will be sacrificed if people learn that they can live, 40 years longer with high degree of health, for example.
That's interesting. Yeah.
Well, I'm not sure if there's time to discuss your other topic, but maybe there is, if it's brief.
Oh,
if not,
yeah. Well, maybe I can quickly ram it in here. So there's another article that I read over the last week that I also think applies to these other articles that I brought up. But the connection relies on an assumption that many hours of our lives in the relatively near future will be spent in the metaverse. So maybe I read too much cyberpunk prose in the 80s and 90s, but I remain in the camp of people who believe that virtual reality will become a realm where a large chunk of the human population will spend many hours of their daily lives. Many times science fiction becomes reality, and William Gibson coined the term cyberspace to describe this virtual reality back in the 80s. And we now use the term cyberspace to describe essentially the web. Later, Neil Stephenson used the word metaverse to describe essentially the same thing in his novel Snow Crash. Well, this week, CEO of Epic Games, Tim Sweeney, whose flagship product Fortnite represents the current day #1 contender for the creation of the metaverse, said that it's important that the metaverse is not controlled by any one corporation, but by everybody. In the article from VentureBeat entitled Tim Sweeney, The Open Metaverse Requires Companies to Have Enlightened Self-Interest, he stated, I think we have to start from principles, right? Most companies focus just on their interests and don't think about the full reciprocity of how do I want this to work as a consumer. I think we have to look at it from all perspectives and play out basic fundamental principles as opposed to just doing what we want. The popular thing now for tech companies is just to do whatever you think you can get away with. And that doesn't really cut it.
This is exactly what I was talking about when I was talking about the gamer being more aligned with collective intelligence.
Yeah.
If you go listen to that interview, one of the things she says is that one of the most predictive factors for collective intelligence is individuals who are sensitive to and can predict the reaction of others to a particular gesture or comment or behavior. And one of the things that she says is, and therefore, groups that have more women in them are more collectively intelligent in a measurable and objective way. But
Wow.
what you just described here is, Tim Sweeney is exhibiting all the factors that this researcher was pointing to, and I believe it is something that happens in the gamer culture more frequently. But with that, I think we have to end. Nora, do you want to take us out?
Yes. So what a great conversation. Thank you, everybody. If you'd like to become a member of RChain, you can do that at rchain.coop. Please make sure to subscribe to RChain on YouTube, follow RChain on Twitter and Instagram. And if you'd like to be a guest, email climate@rchain.coop. And thank you, everybody, so much.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, everyone. Ciao, ciao.